Just because we haven't spoken about Ukraine for several days now, it doesn't mean the war is over or that the war is stalemated and has become now boring, if wars could become boring. But wars can become boring if there is a genuine stalemate lasting for a long time. Now, they are not boring for those involved. But remember the long Iraq-Iran war. After the initial phases, global media began even reporting it. Forget front page. In the course of time, it stopped making even inside pages until something really, really newsy or really terrible happened. So wars can get boring for outsiders, those not directly affected by the wars, if they carry on for too long, where too little is traded, either by way of space or territory or strategic gains and losses. So that is what happened, say, in the Iran-Iraq war. But this war is not like that. In fact, if anything, it does look like that the Ukraine war or the Russian invasion of Ukraine is entering a decisive phase now. I'd say in the way the war has gone so far, it's 2.5 months since it started. It's one of our longer full-fledged wars now in modern history. This is the second decisive phase. The first decisive phase was when the Russian forces had gone for the jugular. They had gone straight at Kyiv. They had come in, they had poured in from Belarus side. If you look at the map of Ukraine and the neighborhood, you can see that is the closest closest region from where Russian forces could come into Ukraine. So they went straight to Kyiv, got into Kyiv's outskirts, were then beaten back. Now, there is a view among people, particularly those who still think greatly of Russia and the Russian armed forces, that this wasn't a Russian defeat, that they had to come back from Kyiv without taking the capital city, the big prize, and something that would have completely pulverized Ukraine and broken the country's national will and driven out the Zelensky government. So Russia would have been able to install one of their own. They think that this was just a feint. This was just a deception by Russia. So Ukraine would concentrate their forces for the defense of Kyiv, while the Russians could make gains in the east and the south, where their territorial claims also lie, particularly with the Donbas region. Because there's a lot of area that they claim to be a part of the Donbas region, to which they have given recognition as sovereign countries, that is Luhansk and Donetsk. But that is not something that we see on the ground. So while it is true that Ukraine did concentrate their forces in the Kyiv region, because anybody would concentrate their forces to defend their capital, at the same time, in that period, it's not as if the Russians made humongous gains in the south and the east. In fact, as things stand, the area around Kherson that you can see in the south of Ukraine, that has exchanged hands several times, and that is still contested. And Mariupol, which was again supposed to be a tactical local target for the Russians, so they could declare victory saying we've taken Mariupol, and thereby established a land corridor. Again, see the map, land corridor became between the Crimean region and the Donetsk region or Donbas region, which they've already occupied. So their troops could move on ground and their equipment from one to the other. That also is not a finished business yet, because as we had said in an earlier episode of Cut the Clutter, and I will share a link with you, and we had spoken about some detail about this area called the Azovstal steel plant, which is not just any little factory. It is more than 11 square kilometers. Now we know that steel plants tend to be like cities or townships. So this is 11 square kilometers. The important thing also, as we had explained earlier, that this plant was shifted by Stalin to east of Urals during the Second World War, because he did not want it to be falling in Hitler's hands, because Hitler's army came and they had occupied the Ukrainian region. Then he shipped this plant back from its wartime location to Azovstal, but while doing that, as he rebuilt it, he had built a warren of bunkers, a catacomb of underground tunnels, and these are all fortified, just in case some foreign force again invaded the Soviet Union. So all that's available, and that's where some of the toughest fighters of Ukrainian armed forces and militias, the Azov regiment, they've been sitting there and fighting. They are the toughest guys for the Russians to dislodge. And you might remember that we had also done an entire episode of Cut the Clutter on when Vladimir Putin spoke with his defense minister and said, look, you've liberated, quote unquote, Mariupol, so declare victory. And I know that those guys are there in Azovstal. And the defense minister had said that will take some time because they're heavily defended. That area will have to be assaulted. And Putin had then said that you don't need to assault Azovstal because that will cause loss of too many lives on their side and also on our side. That is his own soldiers, Russian soldiers. So it seems that that deal is now over. Yesterday, that's on Wednesday afternoon, it seems that the Russians carried out a massive bombardment over Azovstal, and you can see some pictures if you can find them from open Twitter feeds from people who share these quite prolifically, and this is quite telling. If you look at these pictures, it just looks like that yesterday's bombardments in particular, this plant has taken a lot of punishment over the past 2.5 months, but yesterday's bombardments were really very heavy. It's almost like carpet bombing using long-range artillery, both tube artillery, which is like firing the guns, and also rocket artillery, that is multi-barrel rocket launchers from a long range that launch these concentrated rockets to go and just take out an entire area. So after that massive artillery assault or fire assault by artillery, the Russian forces, special forces and militias, particularly the cruelest and toughest of them all, who are the Chechen fighters under now General Kadyrov, they assaulted the Azovstal plant. So that is the big battle that opened out by last night. That is now the second phase, the second most decisive phase of the war. Now, if the first one was a deception, we have enough evidence to say that it wasn't a deception. That first round, the Russians lost, because if it was just a deception, they would not have risked a regiment plus of their most elite troops, that is VDV, as their airborne troops are called, and Spetsnaz with 36 helicopters that landed troops at Hostomel Air Base very close to Kyiv. And the whole idea was that they will take the airbase, and a bunch of IL-76s were coming in, flying more troops and more armor. And that is when a big armored column was also driving in from Belarus side. So they had intended to take that airbase right next to the capital city. That's a bit like it will not happen. That's as if somebody tried to occupy the Hindon Air Base next door to Delhi. Because if they had control of that and they had moved in their armor and stuff there, they could have then launched a much bigger assault in the heart of Ukraine, where Ukrainian armed forces were not so well prepared. But that went wrong, and the Russians lost almost that entire regiment plus of troops, equipment, lots of helicopters and things. It was a big defeat. So nobody does it. Nobody makes that kind of a commitment or pays that kind of a price just for a deception. And we know also how much losses the Russian forces suffered even while they were withdrawing from there. So it is, first of all, it is wrong to say that was a deception. So first decisive phase, the Russians lost. Now they have launched what seems like the second decisive phase. So the firepower used now, the units used now, the hardware used now, in the concentration that it's now coming in, it's telling you that Russians now really mean business, and there is no pretense of sparing any civilians. So once again, Putin might have said the other day that his forces, he might have instructed, in fact, that is how he said, this is my instruction to you, don't assault, don't storm Azovstal. But now they have done just that. Now, what is the compulsion? So one compulsion could be, or possibly is, that 9th of May, Russia is to have its big victory parade, because that day commemorates the day when Hitler's forces surrendered to Soviet forces, to Stalin's forces. So that's a big victory day parade. And he wants to be able to show some tangible achievement, or to say, look, I have fulfilled my mission. As he seems to have scaled down his objectives from pulverizing or from capturing or conquering all of Ukraine to basically capturing Donbass and areas in the south, which one of his generals said the other day, they also want a corridor or a strip going right into Moldavia. That is where it looks like he's moved his goalposts to. So if he's able to completely clear this Azovstal plant from these Azov regiment fighters and others, militias and others, then he can say, Mariupol is all mine. I now have the land corridor between Crimea, which he had captured in 2014, and the parts of Donbass, which he has captured already, and to then declare victory. And then they say, look, I'm carrying on with my stuff in the south, because over the past 48 hours, the port city of Odessa, which is in the south, and which is key to any progress that Russian forces might want to make in the south, particularly which is key to them being able to land their marine forces from the Black Sea, that has been bombarded several times. Even the air base at Odessa has been hit by long-range missiles. So that is where the war stays now. The war has now shifted from the heart of Ukraine to the south and the east of Ukraine. Russians are throwing everything into it, but at the same time, Ukrainians are also better equipped than before. Because what's happened with the Ukrainian is, and meanwhile, a lot of the equipment that has come from NATO and from the US in particular, that has landed over the past 3 weeks. Now, the most important element there was the M777 artillery guns. India has a bunch of those also. Now, these are very efficient, very effective guns with a very long range, great accuracy, and they also fire guided ammunitions which can be deadly. Alongside that, the Americans have also given another range of fire detection radars to Ukrainians. What does a fire detection radar do? When the other side fires artillery at you, your fire detection radars with computers, they can calculate, they can look at the shell, the trajectory, the speed, the distance, and they can figure out precisely where the gun that fired this was located. So before the gun can be moved, you have a chance of hitting that gun position. And we've seen many pictures lately of Russian gun positions having been bombed successfully by the Ukrainians. So these two things, M777 artillery guns, artillery is the king of battle. A majority of casualties, a very large majority of casualties in modern warfare are inflicted by artillery. And it's very demoralizing for, say, infantry soldiers, because they are being hit by something they can't see. It's at a great distance. Artillery can now fire from 50 kilometers. It's at a great distance. And also, if you target it, artillery can move. Artillery now has the ability, modern artillery, of what is called shoot and scoot. Remember, that was talked about a great deal in the case of the Bofors gun, when it was bought in 1986-87. Another evidence that Russians are really moving their heavy stuff and their best equipment into this war now is the appearance of T-90M tanks, the latest variant of T-90M. One variant of T-90, Indian Army also uses in large numbers, and a large number is also on order. So the latest version of T-90 tank is T-90M Prorvi 3. Prorvi means breakthrough. So T-90M Breakthrough 3. The version before this was Breakthrough 2. Now this is so new that even now Russian armed forces have just about 100 of these that are operational. These have much better armor, much better electronics, much better concealment ability. This is a much better tank than anything else the Russians have made as yet. And yet one of these tanks was destroyed outside Kharkiv just over the past couple of days. Now, one of anything will be destroyed. Even if you combine the armor of 5 tanks onto one, something, if it's hit in the right place, at the right range, etc., will destroy it. So it's not as if any tank is impregnable. But the appearance of the wreckage of this tank confirms to us that the Russians are now putting their most cutting-edge weapon systems to the battle. Never mind that they still have very few of them. So they are so new. If you look at this tank, I'm sharing with you a piece on this tank incident and also what this tanks is, etc. From a specialized publication called The War Zone, and this is an article by Joseph Trevithick, Oliver Parker, and Tyler Rogoway. And this article tells you more about this tank, etc. So once again, one tank of a certain kind going down or being destroyed is not such a big story. It's not a headline story, but the fact that the Russians are using this tank was only issued or only given to one of the most wanted regiments of Russian armed forces, that is the 2nd Guards MI Kalinin Taman Motor Rifle Division of the 1st Guards Tank Army. That means also that these units are being used in this battle. And these tanks were issued to this wanted regiment less than 2 years ago. So these are very, very, very new. This article also tells us that given how many tanks the Russians have lost in this, there's another website that I track, and if you are so interested, you can track also. I'm sharing with you a screenshot, Oryx. Now, what they do is they count the losses on either side, Russian side and Ukrainian side, with one difference. Both sides have claims, because if you look at the claims on both sides and you add them up, it looks like all of the Russian army is destroyed and all of the Ukrainian army is destroyed 3 times over. Right? Russians have now brought down 3 times more Bayraktar drones than the Ukrainian army has bought. So that doesn't matter. What they do is they list a loss when they have pictorial or video evidence of that loss. So when you see a loss listed and you put your finger on it or you touch it, it takes you to the picture or to the video of that destroyed equipment. If you look at that, looks like Russians have lost well over 600 tanks already. 600 tanks already in this war. Now, why are the Russians losing so many of these tanks? So once again, if you read this War Zone article, this tells you that the Russian tanks have a design flaw. And that design flaw is that the ammunition is stored right under the hull. So if the ammunition catches fire, as often happens with these new missiles, that is NLAWs and Javelin missiles, then it blows up the tank so badly that its hull can actually jump up to a 2-storied building. And in fact, there are pictures of these sitting on those heights. So that tells you the brutality of that explosion. And that is what's causing very high casualties among Russian tanks and also Russian tank crew. And that is also demoralizing them. That is what they're describing as jack-in-the-box effect. Again, if you want to understand more about artillery, particularly what this artillery system that the Americans have now given to Ukrainians means, and earlier it was expected that this system, M777 artillery, will be used after 15th of May or so, by which time enough Ukrainian soldiers would have trained to use it. But it looks like it's already being used. A bunch of Ukrainian soldiers were being trained to use this earlier by US trainers from the Florida National Guard who were in Ukraine until the war began. And after the war began, they shifted to Germany. That's where new batches of Ukrainian artillery men are being trained to use M777 guns. And that's really a big change on the battlefield. Now, if you want to see what the battlefield looks like, so I am borrowing this map from the Twitter timeline of Ilya Ponomarenko. Ilya Ponomarenko is defense correspondent with the Kyiv Independent, and I watch him very closely. I track him very closely. And if you see this map, you will see now how this war is going on. And it's evident that the Russians are now trying to bottle up. They are coming from the south, they are coming from the east, and a little bit from the west, from the Belarus side, although they are south of Kharkiv, if you look at the map. And they are trying to bottle in or encircle a large body of Ukrainian forces, which is defending a large section of Donbass, which is still under Ukrainian control. So what the Russians are trying to do is, if somehow these two pincers could combine, could link up or could join in, they are hoping or they are trying that they will encircle these large bodies of Ukrainian forces and equipment and have them in the bag. And once you are encircled, it becomes very difficult. But if you look at this area, Ilya says that this is the area of the state of Connecticut in America. I'd say in the Indian context, this is like the state of Nagaland. Although I suspect, unfortunately or sadly, that many of our viewers, many of you, many of us might have a better idea of what Connecticut looks like or how big Connecticut is than of our Nagaland. I wish that wasn't quite true, but we can't run away from harsh truths as well. One of them being that we know very little about our Northeast. So you can choose the size of Connecticut or size of Nagaland. But that is the kind of territory around which the Russians are trying to encircle the Ukrainians. It's not going to be easy, and Ukrainians now have the weapons to fight back.